Welcome to the Make Space for Growth podcast. My name is Sara Vicente Barret and I'm your host. I'm a corporate strategist, problem solver, social entrepreneur, writer, mom of two, and passionate for growth. At home, in business, or in my community. This is season 2 of the Make Space for Growth podcast, A Moment of Lift. 2020 will be remembered by most as the coronavirus year. As a world, that was our common factor. But individually, we all had different experiences, different stories. We all lived it differently. For 2021, our journey continues, strengthened by what we leave behind, hopeful for what lies ahead. From a good, bad, or so-so year, we rise to the challenge ahead. We lift our souls to believe. We lift our minds from the fear. We lift our lives from the dark times that we leave behind. This is our moment of lift, as we get out of this crisis stronger and together. It's time to rise. It's time to turn our eyes upwards. Time to shine a light on the good and leave behind the bad. Whilst 2021 isn't off to a great start, the inflection point is upon us. As such, for this season, I go after a moment of lift. I restart by my virtual travels around the world to speak to women leaders on the change they experience and how they see the path forward. We will be talking about the moment in where we find ourselves as we choose to effect change. The moment of turning around and choosing to move forward and facing life fearless and joyful. Join me for this journey to find out how, because it is time for hope and light. For this opening episode, I am joined by Yael Melamed. Yael is a San Francisco-based psychotherapist and leadership coach. Her work is influenced by her own experience of having cancer, which prompted her to re-examine her life and leave a 10-year career in business to pursue her calling. She holds advanced degrees from Harvard Business School and the California Institute of Integral Studies and is greatly informed by her spiritual path. Yael believes that life's biggest challenges can become blessings if you choose to grow from them. She is passionate about creating a world with less suffering and more actualized potential. Outside of clinical work, Yael is a writer, speaker, and mother to a firecracker of a daughter. Let's get started. Yael, welcome to the Make Space for Growth podcast.
Thank you.
And let's get started. Let's do a little icebreaker first. What was your favorite thing to do as a child, and what did you want to be when you grew up?
From a young age, I loved to have deep conversations with my friends about life. I think we would talk sometimes for like 3 hours a night. That was my favorite thing in the world to do. Felt like such serious philosophers. And I actually never thought about what I wanted to do when I grew up. I knew I wanted to succeed in school and do well, but it wasn't actually anything I thought about until much later in life, until university.
And, I think we're here to talk about deep thoughts and deep conversations. So I think we're on the right path for that. So on that note, can you maybe give us a bit of background on what you do today and how you got here? I know you've been through a major challenge and change already in your life as you fought cancer. And I think it'd be great if you could share a little bit about that.
Sure. Well, where I am now is actually, if you told me 10 years ago that where I would be, I would not have believed you. But today I'm a psychotherapist and a leadership coach and do a lot of writing and speaking about growth and healing and resilience and consciousness, really. And where I started out was a business strategy consultant, and I went to HBS, just like you did, and was really on kind of a business track and never really questioned it until I did have a really big challenge in my life, which was I got a cancer diagnosis. And the experience was really dramatic, actually. I remember where I was on campus. It was after lunch and I was just walking to Baker Library to grab a friend to go back to class. And I got the phone call from Mass General and it was just totally shocking. I had skin cancer and it seemed to be worse than they had thought and they needed to operate urgently. And just as I hung up the phone, I literally had a vision, like it popped into my mind where I saw my obituary in the newspaper and I read it and I felt really sad. It felt very empty to me. It was just all basically a list of accomplishments. And I realized, wait, this doesn't feel like who I am. It's not animated by who I am or what I want to leave behind on earth. This is definitely not what I want my obituary to sound like. And that was really kind of rocked me and changed me and got me out of, I guess you could say, a track I had never really questioned, and got me to take a lot of space, kind of a la your podcast, make space for growth. And I took this space to really think about, like, my priorities and who am I and who do I want to be, and really how do I want to leave this planet behind.
Wow, it's a big shift to go. And so, you actually do two things that are very close to my heart: therapy and coaching. We've had, an HBS alma mater in the podcast before, talking about the difference between the two. What's your take? How would you explain to people, and what are the two spectrums in which you work?
Sure. I would say that for me personally, I bring a little bit of therapy to coaching and a little bit of coaching to therapy, but really, psychotherapy is to really help with mental health issues and diagnosis. And it tends to go much deeper into the past in order to resolve those mental health issues. And so it kind of works from the root level. Whereas coaching is much more in the present and the here and now. It's much more goal oriented, and it tends to be much more focused around work, at least in the type of coaching I do. So here are my goals, what's holding me back from achieving them. And of course, you might look at some of the personal qualities because, of course, we bring us to everything we do, but there's much more of a forward focus.
Yeah, I think she talked about that, about one being looking back and one about being looking forward. Um, so, I'm eager to leave all this pandemic talk behind, but the truth is, it's not really fully behind us. And before we start and looking a bit forward, um, let's just spend a little bit of time looking backwards, right? And so, looking back to in this journey, which is an unfinished journey, what would you describe as your high point and your low point? And if you don't mind sharing that.
Sure. It's funny in a way, I feel sensitive talking about the high point just because I'm aware of that some people are luckier than others in this pandemic and how much pain and suffering there has been for so many people. So I guess I just want to name that. Um, but this might sound very weird because it's been really hard, but it's been a pretty positive experience for me overall. When the pandemic first started, I had this strong feeling inside of me of this is why I was born. I was actually born to be here in this time and to work with people in this time. And so I actually felt a certain sense of purpose. Some of my friends from business school joke around that I'm finally relevant because now everyone cares about mental health in a way they didn't really before.
The nice things your friends say, huh?
um, all in good fun. But yeah, so it felt like, okay, I do feel a really strong sense of purpose. I feel really like I can see the importance of my work more than ever and the impact of it. And on a personal note, the thing I have really enjoyed is actually getting to be home and spending so much more time with my daughter. I almost, got so caught up in the career thing that I just didn't realize how much I was missing. And now I've moved my schedule around. So I put her for nap every single day. And then I wake her up from her nap every single day. And I can pick her up from preschool on Fridays. And it is so meaningful to have that time. And that's probably the high point for me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's taught us to value a lot of the things that we always thought were important, but didn't treat it with enough importance sometimes.
Right.
And
It was an idea, but not an action. I do want to answer the low part, though, your low point, because it was actually related to my own mental health, which is I
yes.
had a lot of trouble sleeping. And that has never happened to me except for when I had a newborn baby, where I would wake up between 1 and 3 in the morning and not be able to sleep. And I've thought a lot about why did that happen and how did that happen. And I think some of it was just being so connected to the collective and all the suffering and the fear and what's going on, and also so much more screen time because my work is in person. Or it was in person. A lot of you guys are on your computer all day. For me, I probably had like maybe 2 hours of screen time per week. And just literally being on a screen like that, it really affected me. I finally got blue light glasses, and it made it all a lot better. Um, and I actually, the thing that helped me was an infrared sauna. And from the first day that I sat in it, I slept through the whole night. And now I do it every single night after my daughter goes to sleep. And it's been helping me sleep through the night. But that was really hard. That was hard to go for about 10 months of not sleeping. It makes you feel like you're going crazy. So that was probably my low point.
Yeah, I mean, sleep deprivation is definitely something to make you crazy or worse. So we've
Yeah.
all learned the hard way, but it's interesting how that developed. Thank you for sharing that. Shall we talk a bit about your clients and your practice and how it developed?
At first there was this freeze. It felt like a freeze. There were some people who had to stop therapy because they lost their jobs. I actually was willing to work with people no matter what, but some people didn't feel comfortable doing it at no charge. And so it kind of, there was maybe a tiny bit of shrinking. A lot of coaching clients canceled their engagements,
Yeah.
and there was a little bit of a pause, and then it just exploded. And I hear from most people, I mean, you can't even find a therapist with an opening. We are just incredibly busy. And for coaching too, there's so many new coaching issues that have come up. Like, it just so happened to coincide with the Black Lives Matter. So there's like now a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how to manage remote teams, and how to care. Where is the line for a company in terms of caring for the mental health of the employees? And so there's so many new things that people are tackling and addressing on the coaching side. And on the therapy side, I've thought about this too, because I was surprised by how well actually my patients were doing for the most part. And I realized it's a lot of the work that I do. I practice depth therapy. So in a way, people come in, they think they're coming in for a particular problem, like this breakup or I lost this job. But in the end, we end up doing very deep work, which is about surrendering to the unknown, loss of control, resilience, things like that implicit in the work. I just noticed that my patients actually seemed like they had a toolbox that really aided them in handling what was going on with the pandemic, like how to handle fear, how to stay grounded, how to really surrender to the fact that we really don't know, how to develop trust, how to have resilience and just coping skills for stress and anxiety. So I was really surprised that people were doing a lot better than I would have expected. I did notice that it felt almost like there was just a collective roller coaster. Sometimes people would be doing well, and then there would just be a dip, because this has just gone on and on and on with very little visibility and so
Yeah.
many challenges, particularly with people who are either alone and extremely lonely, which is another form of torture, honestly, in a way, or people who are working from home and dealing with the challenges of homeschooling and trying to keep their job and just having absolutely no boundaries. And so I'm not saying that there weren't periods of high stress, for sure there were, but I was actually really surprised to see how well prepared people were actually in my practice to handle the challenges.
That's it's the sign that the work that you were doing was actually preparing people for being more resilient and to actually deal with the challenges and not just with the symptoms, right? So I think that probably speaks very highly of the work that you're doing. What about, you spoke about your problems with sleep, you spoke about the screen time and spending more time with your daughter. How did you face this change in your day-to-day life? How did shelter in place affect your day-to-day and family life?
See, again, I'm really one of the lucky ones because I've been able to maintain my nanny care, and that my daughter's school has remained open. She's in preschool, and have never been so grateful to the teachers and just to the people who educate our children. And you kind of take it for granted, and now I really appreciate what an absolute privilege it is to go to school. And so it's been minimally impacted. I mean, there's things about, like this morning I had to get my daughter out early and things like, little adjustments. But overall, honestly, I have been extremely fortunate. If anything, I don't have a commute anymore. I get to pop in for nap times. If I have a cancellation, I get to go play with my daughter. So for me, and sometimes I feel guilty saying it. But for me, I would say in so many ways it has improved my quality of life. I have felt socially isolated though. It's been hard to not be able to do normal weekends away or visits with friends. And I guess humans, we really are resilient, and I've adapted to it. Jewish holidays, Passover, I can't believe it's coming up again. And I remember how shocking it was that last year we had a Seder on Zoom. So there have been losses along the way for sure, but I do feel really aware and grateful for what I have had, even being able to connect with the other moms at preschool, even when there's shelter in place and I'm not allowed to socialize with another household. As long as my daughter's going to school, I can talk to a mom who's there at school. And so, I guess also where I'm realizing as I'm talking to you is just that human connection is really everything. It's like we can have a lot of things melt away, but God, we really need human connection.
So, you mentioned, one of the things you mentioned was how your patients and, probably most of us went through a few roller coasters. How, could you share maybe some tips and some tools that you recommend that people, help people through smoothing some of these ups and downs, or at least getting out of the downs a bit faster?
I'm actually a big fan of writing your process. So I believe that, and it's part of, depth work versus cognitive behavioral approaches. For me personally, I just think, life just does have ups and downs. The Latin root for emotion is emovere. It moves, it comes, it goes. I think of it like just waves. And so I tend to really just sit with people in their movements, and I find that they naturally go in and out of them. Occasionally, if someone is really, it feels like they're stuck and they need help getting out, then we'll talk about the stuckness, or we'll talk about, you know, why do you think you actually may want to be feeling this way? What might be stopping you from wanting to feel better? And of course, there's, doing some troubleshooting, like gratitudes are shown. I know that you know about that, but gratitudes, but you can't just do a gratitude in an artificial way. You can't just write a list, check, check, check. It's actually, all the research shows it's an emotion that has to be felt in
Yeah, you
order.
have to mean it.
Yeah, you really have to feel it. You can fake it till you make it and get there. Really, really feeling it is what gets you into a much better place. And then the other thing, I call this the silver lining method. And one of the really big foundations of my work is actually Viktor Frankl. I don't know if you've heard of him. He wrote Man's Search for Meaning. He was a Holocaust survivor, and all four of my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. And his big kind of message is, while we can't control what happens to us in life, we can control our responses. And so that is something that I do really work with people to do. I even call it the silver lining method. And I find that if you ask someone, well, okay, this terrible thing happened to you, what's the silver lining? They want to punch you in the face. But if you help them actually do that themselves, you don't demand it of them, but you help them get to a place where they can see all of the growth and the lessons and the gift in the difficulty, that is a huge contributor to resilience. So those are some of the ways that I do work with people.
Yeah, I think if you tell someone you have to look at the positives, that doesn't work. But if they conclude that there's actually some positives, then it makes them feel pretty good about themselves. Yeah, the pandemic has clearly brought great struggles, not just on the health and the financial front, but also on the mental health front, as we've been talking about. It's 2021. We've seen a year of this almost now, and it's time that we find things to lift us up. And that's why we're kicking off this season with this conversation. As people put a year of pandemic behind them, how are you helping them as a therapist kind of put behind that bad, and to your point, bring not just a silver lining, but actually bring the good with them, and take the next step in their lives? How are you helping people look forward in an environment where it's actually really still very bleak?
Well, one of the big things is just letting go, understanding we have no control. A lot of suffering comes from an expectation that doesn't materialize. One of the big lessons when I came to the Bay Area was the weather. So I used to be a sun goddess. And if I went to Miami and it rained, I was depressed. It was terrible because I was expecting sun. And when you live in California, in Northern California, it's like you never know what the weather is. It can go from really sunny to rainy. And I always say it developed this kind of Buddhist nature in me around the weather where I no longer woke up expecting something and being disappointed that it didn't occur. I just rolled with it. And it really was a big lesson, even though that might sound like a funny thing. And so that's one of the things is like, we have no idea what's going to happen. Will the vaccines work? Won't they work? When will the pandemic end? Will we be back to work? Will we be traveling? And all of the pain comes from the expectation. Oh, I booked my wedding for June. I thought it was going to happen by June, and now it's not going to happen. And so one of the big things is just letting go. The truth is, we never had control anyway, right? The Germans say, man plans, God laughs. And now we can't even ignore that fact. Before we could have the illusion that we were in control, and now it's very clear that we're not. And so working to just surrender and roll with it and release the expectations and be present is a huge tool in doing it. And also, finding the joy, finding the fun, finding the creativity, even though it's not the same. We were talking about the ways people do try to compensate for the lack of social contact. There are so many cool things that go on, so many, like, people singing from rooftops, people finding different ways to deliver theater. There has been such a lift around creativity and just rejoicing in that and exploring that and bringing it into people's own lives.
Depending on where you are, you may hear that and you may be absolutely, and the other people may hear that. It's like, yeah, but how do I actually do that day to day? Because I'm waking up, I'm locked at home, you know, going from my bed to my desk. And that's kind of the extent of it, or, homeschooling while doing all that. Because, it's looking like that in the UK at the moment. And in some countries of Europe, it's spreading again to more lockdowns. In the day to day, what can people do? Small tips that you think could help. And how are you doing it day to day? And waking up and seeing, a bit like Groundhog's Day and everything repeats. How do you see it?
Well, I do think having a child around is very helpful because they don't experience it like Groundhog Day. They're so incredibly present that everything is wondrous and fascinating and interesting. So I do think sometimes I say, I'll have what she's having, because it does teach me, and it does impact me. But, for example, yesterday I was about to get into my grind and start my work. And I was like, you know what? I just want space. And so I decided to cancel I didn't cancel on a person, but my first scheduled activity. And I went to downtown here where I live in Mill Valley, which is really beautiful. And I just sat outside and sipped a coffee. I put my electronics away and like stared at a tree. And that was so rejuvenating. And it's really easy to not do things like that, to not take a little bit of space. But I think that's key. And to realize that 1 hour of space can actually refuel you for a really, really long time. So to be really diligent about doing that, about self-care, not just going through the motions, but stopping to actually say, wait, how am I doing? What gives? What do I need to add? Do I need to schedule in exercise or things that make me feel good? What makes me feel good? And then making the time for social contact. Some people will have a regular group that just set up, it meets, on Thursday evenings, and then they don't have to think about it or schedule it. It's just there for them. I had a patient who was telling me how she felt really bad actually in her kind of romantic life. She felt like she had let herself go in the pandemic. And it's like, well, don't let yourself go. Just do the things you used to do when you were going out, even though you're not going out. And it really changed how she felt about herself. So I think there's a way of remembering not to let the little things go. I have a couple of friends who are kind of relieved that they don't have to do big birthday parties for their children because it's a way out. It's like, well, maybe you can still make it special and still do those little touches and find a way rather than take the way out. And I don't mean that to kind of like push yourself with more to-dos, because I know we have to let go of some things when our plate has just gotten a lot fuller. But sometimes it's nice to still do those little details and those things that make us feel good, almost like the art. in life to keep the art in life so that it doesn't just become a series of transactions.
The example of the birthday party is a good one, right? I've ran two of them by now because for my children, the first one was March last year, literally 2 weeks into lockdown. So there was nothing happening. And, between organizing a treasure hunt to find the different gifts and actually getting family to join a Zoom, which they wouldn't usually, because usually they live in Portugal, we live in London. And I had never organized a virtual happy birthday. And now, my son was this week, and he was super excited. He was getting a party like his sister did, and put a big screen on the table. And yeah, it wasn't the big party with 30 kids around the house like it was last year. But we found ways that actually the connection point and making sure the important people were there were really what drove us and brought a lot of joy to our day. And I'm sure they'll remember this for quite a while. Here's the thing that I'm curious about, right? We're talking about, and it's a bit of a $1 million question, I guess. We're talking about being more grateful for what we have and how that can help us, about appreciating these things, slowing down, create that space, as you said. And I've been a big believer in this for a while. Obviously, beliefs and actions are not always aligned, but a lot of us have changed and have actually adopted this different attitude with life. How much do you think it persists once we get to go to concerts, restaurants, and birthday parties?
I think it all depends on us, really. I don't think I can answer that question. I think it needs to unfold. And I can say it is my deep hope that we have integrated some of these learnings. And, one of the other big things, aside from what we just talked about, is kindness, human kindness. Just we're all people here. And I've seen such amazing acts of kindness in this pandemic, things that I hadn't really seen before, and ways of just, it's like the light in me sees the light in you kind of thing, and humans being generous and financially supporting people. And I really pray that we hang on to that. The question of what will the future hold, I don't know. But I think it all depends on us. And I think that our world, our future world, depends on us actually retaining these lessons.
I think sometimes I feel a little bit like you. I was incredibly privileged to have help at home and to be able to continue a very relative normal life through the pandemic, where I could work. I kept my job. I even launched the podcast last year. I obviously didn't have life as normal, but I did have a pretty good life within the constraints of it. And I guess the question remains always, what do you retain? Because someone that had a better experience might tend to retain more, and someone that had a worst experience will actually want to let go of it when maybe sometimes they're the people that need it the most. So I do wonder how we take it from here. And because I think there were moments in the past where I've wondered, maybe we needed this as humanity. Obviously not all the suffering and not the pandemic, but maybe we did need something to remind us the small things matter as well. I think it's a hard way to learn them. But sometimes it does make you feel like that. There's been all this soul searching that people have done in the last 12 months. At least I've done a fair amount of it. And it was certainly a topic that came through in season 1 of the podcast. As many of the women I spoke to, they'd show the recognition for what you're saying, for slowing down, for the ability to connect with themselves, right? As you look forward, especially as a leadership coach, what are you seeing? Are there new topics? Are people really soul searching? And what are people looking to do different going forward?
Yes, I absolutely see the soul searching everywhere. And it's, for me, that's kind of like a pleasure to see, because I think it's something that people should be doing all the time. But sometimes we do get to the point where it's only pain that will humble us enough to do that soul searching. And I'm seeing people care more on the leadership coaching side. And I'm seeing people realize that you really can't separate kind of the well-being of the person from the work. I think things are actually being integrated. People are people. All kind of crazy things happen. Your kids pop in on a Zoom. Things you would be, your nanny gets COVID and suddenly you have to cancel a really big meeting, whatever might happen. where it would have felt almost impossible. There's so much more understanding, I think, because we are really all in this together, even though we are on different boats, because some of us have much more fortunate than others. We are still in the same river together. And so I have seen almost like a humanity come into businesses that I've really, really appreciated. And then, some of the things I was mentioning earlier, just around here in the US, around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And also, what does the future look like, and how to manage in a more remote future, and how to redesign and reconfigure.
So you see all this soul searching, you do see, I think I hear you on people looking for more. Do you see new opportunities or new areas of work for you as you go forward in this mission that you've found for yourself to help people navigate change and find themselves?
Yeah. So what I feel that this pandemic has done, just for me personally, is brought me a little bit more into the macro world. My work is very micro. I work with a team or a person, and I've started doing kind of writing. I've started this grief group that is no charge for participants. During COVID, I've actually been invited to the boards of mental health startups. So for me, as mental health becomes more of a conversation that's just integrated into everything we do, there is a lot of opportunity for me to get outside of the office and be more in the macro world.
We spoke about tips day to day and tools that people can use to lift themselves. What's your most common advice to people so that they face 2021 in this positive outlook?
But my advice to myself, I'll give you my advice to myself, which is, again, it's similar to what we talked about with Viktor Frankl, but you can't avoid pain, but you can avoid suffering. So things happen. You cannot fight. If you fight with them, you argue with them, you resist them, you just create suffering on top of the pain. And that to me is real. It's human, but it's also very unproductive. And so the more to just surrender to what's happening, process the pain of what might be happening, but not argue with it, fight it, kind of go back in time and try to bargain about things you can't change, and just focus on moving through and forward, is what I tell myself. That's the advice I give myself.
Yeah, it's not about how we react, it's about how we act. It can change the perspective. Let's wrap up with some food for thought. What would you say lesson from this pandemic? Because I know you've shared with me before how you feel like crisis can create a moment of lift. So what was for you the biggest thing you took out of it?
I am not in control. Let go. I'm not in control.
And what about your biggest challenge?
Well, my biggest challenge really was around my sleep and finding a way to kind of soothe myself and get back into a sleeping rhythm.
You talked about the advice to people in terms of letting go. Was that the best advice you could have had in the beginning of this pandemic?
I really think so, because we were all about to embark on a very wild ride, and all of the future tripping and worrying was just really not useful. I think if we could have all been present and taken it step by step by step, there would be a lot less of the suffering.
Yael, thank you so much. It's been really great. I'm gonna shoot out a fire round, which is just for your quick thoughts and kind of one word on it. It's a bit different from the format of the first season, so hopefully you'll really be surprised. Okay. We're so. It's okay. So, I think before I've asked people about a book they've read or a sport they've done, but we want to look forward. We want to lift ourselves. So if you had one book to recommend, what would that be?
Well, I'm about to read For Small Creatures Such as We by Sasha Sagan that my best friend sent to me. It's next on my nightstand.
And if you were to recommend, if you had one word to describe what you want 2021 to be, what would that be?
Love.
All right. I think that's the perfect way to end it. Thank you so much for being part of the Make Space for Growth podcast.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
I love talking to Yael today. I have to admit, I missed these recordings. I get to meet such amazing women. And the way that Yael faced her challenges and changed from having cancer, left a career in business, and now dedicates her life to helping people transform their lives, whether as a therapist or as a coach, is truly inspiring. And her perspective on appreciating life, on letting go of control, and really embracing what life is bringing us may be one of the good advices I'll take home with me today. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I look forward to the next one. I get to do this.